The clinking of champagne glasses sounded like a death knell. I stood there, a ghost in a tuxedo, with my beautiful vapid mistake clinging to my arm. This gala was supposed to be my victory lap, a declaration that I had moved on, that I was thriving. But then I saw her, my ex-wife, Evelyn. She wasn't just surviving without me, she was incandescent. And when she leaned in to kiss the man beside her, the billionaire whose name was whispered in awe throughout the hall, my entire world, the one I had so carefully constructed on lies and regret, shattered into a million pieces. The tuxedo felt less like a suit and more like a costume, a bespoke straitjacket of charcoal wool. Jonathan adjusted the silk bow tie for the 10th time, his reflection in the penthouse window a distorted effigy of success. Below, the city sprawled out like a blanket of scattered diamonds, each light a life he felt impossibly disconnected from. This was his life now, the sterile luxury, the panoramic views, the gnawing emptiness that no amount of success could fill. "Stop fidgeting, Johnny, you'll wrinkle your suit," a voice like honey-laced poison purred from behind him. Chloe. She emerged from the bedroom, a vision in emerald green silk that clung to her surgically perfected curves. She was, by all accounts, flawless. Her blonde hair was styled in effortless waves, her makeup was immaculate, and her smile was a weapon she wielded with practiced ease. She was the perfect accessory for a man of his stature, a beautiful, uncomplicated distraction. And tonight, at the annual Sterling Industries Gala, she was meant to be his shining trophy. "You look stunning," Jonathan managed, the compliment tasting like ash in his mouth. "I know," she said, preening in front of the mirror. "This dress cost a fortune. It's important to make a good impression tonight. Isn't Mr. Sterling going to be there?" "He's the host, Chloe. Of course, he'll be there." Jonathan sighed, turning away from the window. The thought of facing his colleagues, the board members and the enigmatic CEO, Alistair Sterling, with Chloe on his arm, filled him with a familiar dread he couldn't quite name. It felt like a betrayal, though he struggled to identify whom he was betraying. It had been 2 years since the divorce. 2 years since he had last seen Evelyn. He told himself he had moved on, that this life with Chloe was what he wanted. He had the high-powered job, the luxurious apartment, the beautiful girlfriend. He had won. But some nights, in the dead quiet between Chloe's shallow breaths, he would lie awake and remember a different life. A life filled with laughter that wasn't forced, with conversations that went deeper than gossip and material wants, with a love that felt less like a transaction and more like coming home. He remembered the early days with Evelyn in their tiny, cramped apartment that was always filled with the smell of her painting supplies and burnt toast. He remembered her, hair tied up in a messy bun, a smudge of cerulean blue on her cheek, her eyes alight with a passion he hadn't seen in anyone since. She was a dreamer, an artist who saw beauty in the cracks of the pavement and poetry in the mundane. He had been a struggling junior executive then, full of ambition and a desperate need to prove himself. She had believed in him, had been his anchor in the stormy sea of his own insecurities. "Don't you think this necklace is a bit much?" Chloe asked, holding up a diamond monstrosity that glittered aggressively under the recessed lighting. "Or is it just enough?" "It's perfect," Jonathan said, his voice hollow. He thought of the simple silver locket he had given Evelyn for their first anniversary. It had held a tiny, poorly painted picture of them, their smiles wide and genuine. She had never taken it off. His ascent at the company had been meteoric, but it had come at a cost. The long hours bled into weekends, the business trips became more frequent, and the man who came home to Evelyn was a shell of the one she had married. He became cynical, ruthless, obsessed with the next promotion, the next deal. He had traded their shared dreams for stock options and corner offices. He had told himself he was doing it for them, for their future. But somewhere along the way, their future had become his ambition. The arguments had started slowly, then escalated into bitter wars of attrition. She accused him of being absent, of losing himself. He called her naive, told her she didn't understand the pressures he was under. He started seeing her art, her passion, as a frivolous hobby rather than the essence of who she was. The final blow had been his affair. It hadn't been with Chloe, but a colleague, a meaningless, sordid liaison born of ego and alcohol. When Evelyn found out, she hadn't screamed or thrown things. Her silence had been far worse. The look in her eyes was not one of anger, but of profound disappointment, as if she was finally seeing him for the hollow man he had become. The divorce had been swift and clean. She didn't want the apartment, the money, the life he had built. She just wanted out. She packed her canvases, her paints, and the silver locket, and walked out of his life without a backward glance. He hadn't seen or heard from her since. He had told himself it was for the best, that he was free. He had found Chloe, a woman who fit seamlessly into his new life, who admired his wealth and status without questioning the man he had become to achieve it. "Ready to go?" Chloe asked, snapping him out of his reverie. She looped her arm through his, her touch feeling cold and foreign. "Let's go show them who the real power couple is." Jonathan forced a smile, the muscles in his face protesting. As they walked towards the door, he caught his reflection once more. The man staring back at him was a stranger, a caricature of success. He was living in a gilded cage of his own making, and tonight he was about to parade his captor at the biggest social event of the year. A sudden, chilling premonition washed over him, a feeling that this night would change everything. He just didn't know how right he was. The Sterling Tower was an architectural marvel, a shard of obsidian and glass that pierced the heavens. The gala was being held in the grand ballroom on the 100th floor, a space designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure. As Jonathan and Chloe stepped out of the private elevator, they were met with a wave of sensory overload. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and exotic flowers. The sound was a symphony of hushed conversations, clinking glasses, and the melancholic strains of a string quartet playing in a discreet corner. The ballroom was a hall of mirrors, both literally and figuratively. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling mirrors, reflecting the glittering assembly into an infinite, dazzling mirage. It was a room full of people who, like him, were polished reflections of their true selves. Jonathan saw his colleagues, their faces stretched into practiced smiles, their eyes constantly scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. He saw his rivals, their handshakes firm, but their gazes cold. This was his world, the battlefield where careers were made and broken over canapes and champagne. "Oh, Johnny, it's breathtaking," Chloe whispered, her eyes wide with a covetous glee. She was in her element, a predator in a jungle of wealth and influence. She tightened her grip on his arm, her scarlet nails digging slightly into the fabric of his suit. "There's Mr. Henderson from finance. I hear his wife just got a new face. Let's go say hello." Before Jonathan could protest, she was pulling him into the fray. He plastered on his corporate smile and navigated the treacherous social currents. He exchanged pleasantries with people he despised, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, and accepted compliments on his lovely companion with a nauseating sense of hypocrisy. Chloe was a natural, effortlessly charming and disarming, collecting gossip and compliments like precious jewels. She was a reflection of his success, and for that, people adored her. But as he watched her flatter a balding executive, he felt a profound sense of loneliness, an isolation so complete it was almost physical. He remembered galas with Evelyn. She had hated these events, had called them peacock parades, but she had always come for him. She would stand quietly by his side, a pocket of stillness in the swirling chaos. While he networked, she would observe, her artist's eye picking up on the subtle nuances of human interaction, the flicker of desperation in a young associate's eyes, the false bravado of a struggling manager. Later, she would describe it all to him with a wry, gentle humor that made the whole charade bearable. She had been his anchor, his reality check. Without her, he was just another reflection in the hall of mirrors, indistinguishable from the rest. "Jonathan, my boy," a booming voice broke through his thoughts. It was Robert Morrison, his direct superior, and a man whose jovial demeanor masked a shark's instincts. "Good to see you. And you must be Chloe." Enchanting. "Mr. Morrison, it's a pleasure," Chloe cooed, extending her hand. "The pleasure is all mine," Robert said, his eyes lingering on her a moment too long. He turned back to Jonathan, his smile tightening. "Big night, Jonathan. Rumor has it Sterling is going to announce the new VP of European Operations tonight. You're still the frontrunner, of course, but competition is stiff. The promotion. It was the reason he was here, the reason he was enduring this hollow spectacle. It was the culmination of years of relentless work, of sacrificed weekends and strained relationships. It was the prize he had told himself would finally make it all worthwhile. "I'm confident," Jonathan said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Confidence is good, but in this company it's all about perception," Robert said, his gaze sweeping over Chloe with a look that was both appreciative and dismissive. "You've got to have the right assets. Make a good impression on the big man." He clapped Jonathan on the shoulder. "Don't screw it up." As Robert walked away, Jonathan felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The right assets. Was that all Chloe was to him? A tool for his ambition? He looked at her, now engaged in an animated conversation with another executive's wife, and for the first time he saw the stark reality of their relationship. It was a business merger, a partnership of convenience. He provided the lifestyle, and she provided the image. There was no depth, no real connection, just a shared interest in the superficial. He needed a drink. Excusing himself, he made his way to the bar, navigating the clusters of preening guests. He ordered a scotch, neat, and downed it in one go, the fiery liquid doing little to quell the anxiety churning within him. He leaned against the marble bar, the cold stone a welcome shock to his system. He felt like a fraud, a man playing a role he had long since forgotten how to exit. He scanned the room again, a masochistic urge compelling him to take in the full scope of his gilded prison. The chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen tears. The champagne flowed like water. The laughter was loud, but held no joy. It was a perfect, beautiful, soulless performance. And then he saw her. It was just a glimpse at first, a flash of deep crimson in the sea of black and gold. A woman was standing by the panoramic window, her back to him, looking out at the city lights. There was something about her posture, a quiet confidence and grace that stood in stark contrast to the frantic energy of the room. He felt a jolt, a sense of recognition so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of him. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat. He told himself it was impossible, that his mind was playing tricks on him, conjuring a ghost from the past. Evelyn wouldn't be here. This wasn't her world. She had run from this life, from him. Why would she ever come back? But as the woman turned slightly, her profile was illuminated by the city lights, and the breath caught in his throat. The elegant line of her jaw, the gentle curve of her neck. It was her. It was Evelyn. But it was also not. The woman he remembered was a soft, gentle soul who wore her heart on her sleeve. This woman was different. She held herself with an poise and self-possession he had never seen before. She was no longer the girl with paint on her cheek, but a woman who looked as if she owned the very view she was admiring. Jonathan's blood ran cold. The hall of mirrors suddenly felt like a labyrinth, and he was lost in its distorted reflections, staring at a woman who was both his past and a complete stranger. His world, which had been teetering on a fragile foundation of denial, was about to come crashing down. Time seemed to slow down, the cacophony of the Gala fading into a dull, distant roar. Jonathan's universe had contracted to a single point, the woman in the crimson dress. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He was rooted to the spot, a statue of a man holding an empty Scotch glass. She turned fully then, stepping away from the window and into the light. And it was her, Evelyn, but a version of her that he could never have imagined. The changes weren't drastic, but they were profound. The mousy brown hair he remembered was now a rich, dark auburn, styled in a sophisticated chignon that exposed the elegant nape of her neck. The simple bohemian clothes she used to favor were gone, replaced by a floor-length crimson gown that draped over her figure with an understated elegance. It wasn't flashy or revealing, but it commanded attention. It spoke of confidence, of a woman who was comfortable in her own skin, who didn't need to shout to be heard. But the most striking change was in her eyes. They had always been her most expressive feature, a deep, soulful blue. Now, they held a new light, a knowing, serene depth. The vulnerability he had once known, and perhaps taken for granted, was gone. In its place was a quiet strength, a self-assurance that was both captivating and deeply unsettling. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. The realization hit him not like a wave, but like a tsunami, wiping out the carefully constructed narrative of his post-divorce life. He hadn't left her broken, he had set her free. She began to move through the crowd, and Jonathan watched, mesmerized. She navigated the room with an ease and grace she had never possessed before. People turned as she passed, their conversations faltering for a moment. She wasn't seeking attention, but it was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. She would offer a small, polite smile to some, a brief nod to others. She seemed to know people here, to belong in a way she never had when she was on his arm. Who was she now? What had happened in the 2 years since she had walked out of his life? He had imagined her struggling, perhaps working a menial job to support her art, living in a small, lonely apartment. It was a cruel, egotistical fantasy, he now realized, one that had allowed him to justify his own choices. The woman before him had not been struggling. She had been transforming. Chloe's voice, sharp and unwelcome, pierced his trance. "Johnny, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." He flinched, turning to find her beside him, a pout on her perfectly glossed lips. "I'm fine," he said, his voice strained. "Well, you've been staring at that woman for 5 minutes. Do you know her?" Chloe's eyes narrowed, scanning Evelyn with a critical, competitive gaze. "The dress is a bit plain, don't you think? And she should have worn more jewelry." "I used to know her," Jonathan mumbled, turning back to the bar to order another scotch. He needed the burn, the distraction. "Used to know her? What does that mean?" Chloe pressed, her tone laced with suspicion. "It means we worked together a long time ago," he lied, the words feeling like gravel in his mouth. He couldn't tell her the truth. He couldn't say, "That's the woman I threw away, the woman whose heart I broke, the woman who is now impossibly more radiant and alive than I have ever seen her." His lie seemed to placate Chloe for the moment. She launched into a story about a rival socialite's fashion faux pas, but Jonathan wasn't listening. His attention was completely captivated by Evelyn. He watched as she was approached by Marcus Thorne, the notoriously ruthless head of acquisitions. Jonathan braced himself, expecting Thorne to dismiss her with his usual arrogance, but instead, Thorne's face broke into a genuine, respectful smile. He leaned in, listening intently to whatever she was saying. They spoke for several minutes, and as they parted, Thorne nodded with an expression of sincere admiration. It was surreal. This was a world Evelyn had always despised. She had called these people hollow men and gilded women. Yet here she was, not just present, but seemingly respected. How? His mind raced, trying to piece together an explanation. Had she given up her art? Had she sold out, taken a corporate job? The thought was a bitter pill, but as he watched her he knew that wasn't it. The woman in crimson hadn't compromised herself. She had evolved. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne flutes, and Evelyn took one. As she brought the glass to her lips, her eyes swept across the room. For a heart-stopping moment, their gazes met. Jonathan froze. The entire ballroom, with its noise and its light, seemed to vanish. There was only the vast, silent chasm of 2 years between them. He saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a brief, unreadable expression that might have been surprise, or perhaps something else entirely. It was there and then gone in an instant. She didn't smile, she didn't frown. She simply held his gaze for a second that stretched into an eternity, and then, with a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, she looked away, turning her attention to someone who had just approached her. That nod was more devastating than any scream or accusation could have been. It was a dismissal. It was polite, it was civil, but it was a clear and unambiguous signal that he no longer had any power over her. He was a part of her past, a chapter that had been read, closed, and put away on a dusty shelf. The air rushed back into his lungs, and he felt a dizzying mix of emotions, shock, regret, and a strange, agonizing pang of longing. He wanted to march over there, to demand an explanation, to ask her how she had done it, how she had become this person. But what right did he have? He was the one who had walked away. He was the one who had shattered their life together. "Johnny, are you even listening to me?" Chloe's voice was sharp with irritation. "What? Yes, of course," he stammered, tearing his eyes away from Evelyn. "I was saying we should try to get a moment with Mr. Sterling. This could be your only chance to speak with him before the announcement." The promotion. He had almost forgotten. The prize that had once seemed like the most important thing in the world now felt like a hollow, meaningless trinket. What was a vice presidency compared to the loss he was now feeling so acutely? He had climbed to the top of the mountain, only to realize he had left his soul at the bottom. And he had just seen it, walking through a crowded room in a crimson dress, more beautiful and unattainable than ever before. As if summoned by Chloe's ambition, Alistair Sterling made his entrance. The low hum of the gala seemed to dip in volume, a collective intake of breath as the host finally graced his own party. Sterling was not what most people expected. He wasn't old or ostentatious. He was in his late 40s, with a lean, athletic build, sharp features, and eyes that seemed to see right through the polished veneers of everyone in the room. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored black suit with no tie, an act of defiance against the corporate dress code he himself had created. He exuded an aura of quiet, unshakable power. He didn't need to command a room. His presence was enough. "There he is," Chloe whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and avarice. "Go on, Johnny. Go talk to him." But Jonathan couldn't move, because Alistair Sterling was not alone. He had walked into the room and moved directly, without hesitation, to the woman in crimson, to Evelyn. Jonathan watched, his heart turning to a leaden weight in his chest, as Sterling reached her side. The billionaire didn't offer a formal handshake or a polite greeting. Instead, he placed a hand gently on the small of her back, a gesture of casual, profound intimacy. He leaned in and murmured something in her ear, and Evelyn turned to him, her face breaking into a smile. It was a genuine, radiant smile, the kind Jonathan hadn't seen in years, the kind he used to believe was reserved only for him. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Evelyn and Alistair Sterling. It was impossible. It made no sense. How could their worlds have possibly collided, the quiet, anti-corporate artist and the titan of industry? It was a conjunction of two completely different galaxies. The crowd began to gravitate towards them, a slow, inexorable tide of sycophants and hopefuls. Sterling was the sun, and everyone in the room was a planet desperate to be caught in his orbit. But Sterling seemed oblivious to them all. His focus was entirely on Evelyn. They stood together, a portrait of effortless connection, speaking in low tones, seemingly in a world of their own. "Well, I'll be damned," Chloe breathed, her voice a strange mix of shock and envy. "Who is she?" The lie about them being former colleagues now felt flimsy and transparent. The truth was lodged in Jonathan's throat, a bitter, jagged pill he couldn't swallow. He felt a surge of something hot and unfamiliar, jealousy. It was a raw, primal emotion that took him by surprise. He had no right to be jealous. He had a beautiful woman on his arm. He had been the one to end things. But seeing Evelyn with another man, with that man, felt like a physical blow. He watched Sterling's hand on her back, the easy way he stood beside her, the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in a room of 1,000. He was seeing a version of Evelyn he had never known, a woman who was not his shy, supportive partner, but a confident equal to one of the most powerful men in the world. What had he missed? What had he been so blind to? He remembered her trying to talk to him about her art, about a new gallery she had discovered, about an idea for a series of paintings. He had dismissed it all as a distraction, something she did to pass the time while he was out conquering the world. He had never seen it as her purpose, her passion. He had never seen her. Not really. The realization was a slow, agonizing burn. He had always seen himself as the star of their story, the protagonist. Evelyn had been a supporting character, the loving wife who existed to bolster his own journey. Now, watching her with Sterling, he understood. She had been on her own journey all along, one he had been too self-absorbed to notice. Her story hadn't ended when theirs did. It had just begun. "Jonathan, are we just going to stand here?" Chloe hissed, her patience wearing thin. "This is our chance. Robert Morrison is already heading over there. We're going to miss our window." He looked at Chloe, at her perfectly made-up face, her eyes glittering with naked ambition. She saw Sterling and Evelyn as an opportunity, a stepping stone. She couldn't see the complex, painful history that was unfolding before his very eyes. To her, this was just another move in the game. To him, it felt like the final checkmate. He let Chloe pull him forward, his legs moving on autopilot. As they got closer, he could hear snippets of their conversation. Sterling was laughing, a low, genuine sound. And then she told the curator that his entire collection was emotionally bankrupt, Sterling was saying, his eyes twinkling with amusement as he looked at Evelyn. Evelyn smiled wryly. "He asked for my honest opinion. I believe in honest opinions." Jonathan stopped dead in his tracks. That was pure Evelyn, unfiltered, unafraid to speak her mind, something he had once loved and had later tried to suppress, telling her to be more diplomatic. Sterling wasn't just tolerating her honesty, he was captivated by it. "Jonathan, what are you doing?" Chloe tugged at his arm, but he was frozen. They were only a few feet away now. He could see the fine details, the way a stray auburn curl had escaped her chignon, the subtle strength in her hands as she held her champagne flute, the calm certainty in her eyes. She was so close, yet she felt 1,000,000 miles away. Robert Morrison intercepted them, his face a mask of forced joviality. "Alistair, so good to see you," he boomed, extending a hand to Sterling. Sterling turned, his smile fading into a polite, neutral expression as he shook Robert's hand. His eyes flickered past Robert, past Chloe, and landed on Jonathan. For a second, there was nothing but a cool, analytical assessment in his gaze. It was the look of a man who could size up another man's worth in a single glance. And then his eyes moved back to Evelyn, and the warmth instantly returned. It was a clear, unspoken message. She was the one who mattered. The rest of them were just background noise. The string quartet began a new piece, a haunting, melancholic melody that seemed to underscore the tragedy of Jonathan's revelation. He had spent 2 years telling himself he was better off, that he had made the right choice. But in the orbit of Alistair Sterling, with Evelyn as the radiant sun, Jonathan finally understood the truth. He hadn't won. He had lost. He had lost everything that ever truly mattered, and he hadn't even realized it until this very moment. He was just a cold, lonely planet cast out into the darkness. The air grew thick with anticipation. It was time for the main event of the evening, Alistair Sterling's speech and the much-awaited announcement of the new VP of European Operations. The crowd coalesced around the small, elevated stage at the front of the ballroom. Jonathan found himself swept along with the current, Chloe's hand a vice grip on his arm. He was standing no more than 15 feet from the stage, close enough to see the confident set of Sterling's shoulders, close enough to see the serene expression on Evelyn's face as she stood beside him. She wasn't standing in his shadow, she stood with him, a partner. Sterling stepped up to the microphone, and an immediate hush fell over the room. "Good evening, everyone." His voice was calm and resonant, filling the vast space without any effort. "Thank you all for coming. We're here tonight to celebrate another year of unprecedented success for Sterling Industries. A success that is built on innovation, on relentless drive, and most importantly, on the brilliant people who make this company what it is." He spoke for a few minutes about quarterly earnings and market projections, the kind of corporate speech Jonathan had heard 100 times. But there was a difference. Sterling spoke with a conviction and clarity that was magnetic. Jonathan's own colleagues were hanging on his every word. Chloe was practically vibrating with excitement beside him. But Jonathan's eyes were fixed on Evelyn. She was watching Sterling not with the fawning admiration of a subordinate, but with a quiet pride, a deep and knowing affection. "As you know," Sterling continued, his tone shifting, "we are on the verge of a major European expansion. The leadership for this venture is critical. The person who takes on this role must be not only a brilliant strategist, but a person of integrity and vision." This was it. Jonathan's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt Chloe squeeze his arm, her own ambition a palpable force. He had put in the hours, he had closed the deals, he had played the game. He was the logical choice. He was the front-runner. Sterling paused, his eyes scanning the crowd of upturned, hopeful faces. "And so, it is my great pleasure to announce that the new vice president of our European operations is Catherine Fowles." A smattering of polite, surprised applause broke out. Jonathan felt the blood drain from his face. Catherine Fowles, his main rival, a competent, if uninspired, choice. He felt a wave of dizziness, the floor seeming to drop out from beneath him. All that work, all that sacrifice, for nothing. He heard Chloe let out a small, frustrated hiss beside him. Her grip on his arm loosened. In that moment, he knew his value in her eyes had just plummeted. He was no longer the front-runner, the rising star. He was just another failed executive. But the shock of losing the promotion was nothing compared to what happened next. Sterling smiled, letting the applause die down. "My congratulations to Catherine, and now for a more personal announcement." He turned, his entire demeanor softening as he looked at Evelyn. He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers and drawing her closer to him. "Many of you know me as a businessman," Sterling said, his voice now filled with a warmth that was startlingly genuine. "You know me as a man who values logic, strategy, and results. But for the past 2 years, my greatest success, my most valued asset, has had nothing to do with this company." He looked directly at Evelyn, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, though it was still amplified throughout the silent ballroom. "I've learned more about vision and integrity from this woman than from any business school or boardroom. She is an artist, a philanthropist, and the most fiercely honest person I have ever known. She came into my life and reminded me of what it means to see the world not just for what it is, but for what it could be." Jonathan felt like he couldn't breathe. The air in his lungs had turned to cement. He was hearing another man describe the woman he had thrown away, articulating all the things he had failed to see, all the qualities he had taken for granted and tried to stifle. Sterling continued, "We have kept our private life just that, private. But I find I am no longer willing to hide the best part of my life. This woman has brought more color and meaning to my world than all the success I have ever achieved." He then turned his gaze back to the crowd, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "And I am overjoyed to announce that this fall, Evelyn Reed will become my wife." A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by an explosion of applause far more enthusiastic than the one for the new VP. Jonathan didn't hear it. He was deafened by the roar of his own blood in his ears. Evelyn Reed. She hadn't taken his name back. She had shed it. She had shed him. And then it happened, the moment that would be seared into his memory for the rest of his life. As the applause swelled, Sterling leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a chaste, public peck on the cheek. It was a kiss of profound love and intimacy, a kiss that spoke of shared secrets and quiet mornings, of deep connection and unwavering devotion. Evelyn's hand came up to cup his cheek, her body melting into his, and Jonathan froze. He was no longer in the Sterling Tower ballroom. He was back in their tiny apartment, the smell of turpentine in the air. Evelyn was showing him a new painting, her eyes shining with excitement. He was half listening, his mind on a deadline, his fingers tapping out an email on his phone. He had mumbled something dismissive, something about it being nice. The light in her eyes had dimmed. He was at their favorite restaurant, the one they could barely afford. She was telling him a story, laughing, and he had cut her off to take a call from the office. He had held up a finger, silencing her joy. He was in their bedroom, the divorce papers on the nightstand between them. She wasn't crying. She was just looking at him with an unbearable, quiet sadness. "You were never really here, Jonathan," she had whispered. "You were always chasing something else. I hope you find it." He had found it. The promotion he didn't get, the empty penthouse, the hollow relationship. He had chased it all and ended up with nothing. And the woman he had left behind, the woman he had deemed not ambitious enough, not suited for his world, was now standing in the center of it, beloved by a man who was everything Jonathan had ever aspired to be and more. The kiss ended, but Jonathan was still frozen, a prisoner of his own regret. He saw it all with a terrible, soul-crushing clarity. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost the best part of himself, and he had stood by and watched, a willing accomplice to his own destruction. The beautiful, vapid mistake on his arm meant nothing. The promotion he had just lost meant nothing. All that mattered was the woman in crimson, the ghost of his past and the symbol of his monumental failure, kissing the billionaire who had recognized the treasure he had thrown away. The applause finally subsided, replaced by a renewed buzz of excited chatter. People swarmed Sterling and Evelyn, a flurry of congratulations and well-wishes. Jonathan remained immobile, an island of silent horror in the celebratory sea. The world was moving on around him, realigning itself to this new, astonishing reality, but he was stuck in the moment of the kiss. The image burned onto the back of his eyelids. "Well," Chloe said, her voice dripping with venom, "that was a complete and utter waste of a $5,000 dress." Her words barely registered. He was watching Evelyn. She was graceful and composed amidst the throng, accepting congratulations with a quiet smile. She never once looked his way. It was as if he didn't exist. He had become invisible, a spectre at the feast. "Did you hear me, Jonathan?" Chloe snapped, her nails digging into his arm again, this time with painful force. "You lost. The promotion, everything. And to top it all off, your little old colleague is marrying the damn host. You didn't think that was something you should have mentioned." He finally turned to look at her. The charming, beautiful mask had fallen away, revealing a face contorted with fury and bitter disappointment. Her ambition was a raw, ugly thing, and he had just failed to feed it. "She's my ex-wife," he said, the words feeling like shards of glass in his throat. Chloe's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed into slits of pure contempt. "Your ex-wife? Are you kidding me? You brought me here to this event to go up against your billionaire marrying ex-wife? Did you want to humiliate me?" "No, he started, but he had no explanation. "I didn't know." "You didn't know?" she scoffed, her voice rising. Several people nearby turned to look. "How could you not know? You let me stand here and prattle on about her plain dress while she's engaged to Alistair freaking Sterling. You made me look like a fool." The injustice of her accusation was staggering. She was the one feeling humiliated. A sudden white-hot anger surged through him, burning away the shock and grief. It was an anger directed at Chloe, at himself, at the entire hollow charade. "This was never about you, Chloe," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Oh, I think it was," she shot back. "This was about you parading your new, younger model in front of the old one, except the old one got a serious upgrade and left you, and me, in the dust. You're a failure, Jonathan. Robert Morrison was right. You don't have the right assets." Her words were meant to wound, and they did. But they also liberated him. He looked at this woman, this perfect accessory he had chosen, and felt nothing but a profound, chilling emptiness. Their entire relationship was a transaction, and the terms of the deal had just been irrevocably broken. "We're done," he said, the decision solidifying in his mind with absolute certainty. Chloe laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You're breaking up with me. You think you're in a position to break up with anyone? You just lost everything." "No," Jonathan said, a strange sense of calm settling over him. "I lost everything 2 years ago. I just didn't realize it until tonight." He turned and walked away from her, leaving her standing there, her mouth agape in fury. He didn't care about the scene she might make. He didn't care about what his colleagues would whisper tomorrow. None of it mattered. He pushed his way through the crowd, his movements frantic, desperate. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get out, to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom, to escape the reflection of his own failure in 1,000 mirrors. He found a side door that led to a deserted service corridor. He stumbled through it, the sudden silence a stark contrast to the noise of the gala. The corridor was dimly lit, lined with pipes and electrical conduits. It was the unglamorous guts of the magnificent building. He leaned against the cool concrete wall, his bespoke suit feeling utterly ridiculous in this stark industrial space. He closed his eyes and finally let out the breath he had been holding. He had spent 2 years running from the ghost of his marriage, burying his regret under layers of work, money, and meaningless affection. Tonight, that ghost had materialized in a crimson dress and systematically dismantled his entire life. He thought of Evelyn. He tried to reconcile the woman he had married with the woman who was about to marry Alistair Sterling. Had the strength, the confidence, the grace been there all along, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the freedom to emerge? Had he not just failed to see it, but actively suppressed it with his own ego and ambition? A soft click echoed down the corridor. Jonathan opened his eyes and saw a figure standing at the far end, silhouetted against the light from the ballroom. His heart leapt into his throat. It was her. Evelyn walked slowly towards him, her crimson dress a slash of colour in the drab corridor. Her expression was unreadable. She stopped a few feet away from him, the space between them charged with unspoken history. "I saw you leave," she said, her voice quiet, calm. It was the voice he remembered from late-night conversations and whispered secrets, but it held a new resonance, a new strength. "Evelyn," he breathed her name, the first time he had said it aloud in 2 years. It felt both foreign and achingly familiar. "I didn't know you would be here," she stated, not as an accusation but as a simple fact. "I work here," he said, the words sounding pathetic to his own ears. I was a director." She nodded slowly, her gaze analytical, as if she were studying a piece of art, trying to understand its composition. "You look tired, Jonathan." Her simple observation undid him more than Chloe's vitriol ever could. She wasn't angry. She wasn't gloating. She was just seeing him, truly seeing him, perhaps for the first time tonight. "I heard the announcement," he said, his voice cracking. "Congratulations." "Thank you," she said, her expression softening slightly. "Alistair is a good man. He sees me." The simple, powerful truth of that statement was a knife to his heart. He sees me. The 3 words articulated everything Jonathan had failed to do. He had looked at her, but he hadn't seen her. He had lived with her, but he hadn't known her. "How?" he asked, the question a raw, desperate plea. How did this happen? You and him. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of the old Evelyn, a trace of the pain he had caused. After I left you, she began, her voice steady. I was lost for a while. I had lost myself in you, in our life. I had to figure out who I was without you. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I threw myself into my art. I painted with an anger and a grief I had never known. And then, one day, the anger was gone, and the grief was gone, and there was just me. I started showing my work in small galleries. One of those galleries was supported by a philanthropic trust. Alistair is the head of that trust. He bought one of my paintings. Then he came to my studio to see more. We talked for hours about art, about life, about what it means to build something meaningful. He didn't see my art as a hobby. He saw it as my soul. The story was so simple, so organic. It was a story of connection, of being seen and valued for who you truly are. It was the story he and Evelyn should have had. I'm sorry, Evie, he whispered, using the old pet name without thinking. The word hung in the air between them, a relic of a forgotten language. For everything. I was a fool. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Yes, she said, her voice thick with an ancient sorrow. You were. But I'm not that woman anymore, Jonathan. The woman you were a fool to is gone. You didn't break her. You set her free. She turned to leave, her part in this chapter of his life finally, truly over. She was walking back to her new life, to the man who saw her, leaving Jonathan alone in the service corridor, in the ruins of the life he had chosen. The walk from the service corridor back into the ballroom was the longest of Jonathan's life. Each step was a reckoning. The glittering reflections in the mirrors no longer showed a successful executive. They showed a hollow man, a ghost haunting the scene of his own demise. He saw his colleagues who now cast him pitying or scornful glances. The news of his public failure, losing the promotion and being unceremoniously dumped by his trophy girlfriend in the same night, would already be making the rounds. He was a cautionary tale in the making. But the social humiliation was a dull ache compared to the sharp, searing pain of his conversation with Evelyn. Her words echoed in his mind. You didn't break her. You set her free. She had absolved him of a crime he hadn't realized he was committing. He had thought his betrayal was the affair, the arguments, the neglect. But the true crime was so much deeper. He had tried to put her light in a box, to tailor her vibrant, artistic soul to fit his drab corporate ambitions. Her freedom hadn't just been from him, but from the cage he had unknowingly built around her. He needed to speak to her one more time, not to win her back. He knew with a soul-deep certainty that ship had sailed, crossed an ocean, and docked in a land he could never reach. He needed to do it for himself. He needed one final act of honesty to begin the long, arduous process of finding the man he had lost so many years ago. He saw her near the grand entrance, standing with Alistair Sterling. They were preparing to leave. Sterling had his hand on her back, a quiet, protective gesture. He was laughing at something she had said, his face alight with genuine joy. The sight was another twist of the knife, yet Jonathan found himself feeling a strange, detached sense of peace. She was happy, she was safe, she was loved, and in the end, wasn't that what he should have wanted for her all along? As he approached, Alistair Sterling's eyes met his. The warmth in them instantly vanished, replaced by a cool, unyielding steel. It was the look of a man protecting what was most precious to him. "Jonathan," Evelyn said, her voice neutral, though he could see a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Mr. Sterling," Jonathan began, his voice hoarse. He extended a hand. "I just wanted to say congratulations to both of you." Sterling looked at Jonathan's outstretched hand for a long moment before taking it. His grip was firm, his gaze unwavering. "Thank you," he said, the words polite but frosty. "Evelyn," Jonathan turned to her, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Can I have 1 minute, please?" Evelyn looked at Sterling, a silent question passing between them. Sterling gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his eyes never leaving Jonathan. He trusted her. The depth of that trust was another revelation. Sterling stepped back, giving them a small pocket of privacy amidst the departing guests. "I'm not here to ask for anything," Jonathan said quickly, the words tumbling out. I need to say this. I need you to know that I see it now. Everything." He took a shaky breath. "I remember when we first met. You were painting in the park, and you had this light inside you. You saw the world in a way I couldn't understand, but I was drawn to it. I loved it. And somewhere along the way, I became afraid of it. Your light made my own ambitions feel small and grey, so I tried to dim it. I told you to be more practical, to be more diplomatic. I dismissed your art. I tried to make you a reflection of my world, instead of celebrating the beautiful, brilliant world you had inside you." He could see tears welling in Evelyn's eyes, and he felt his own throat tighten. The affair, that was just a symptom of a much deeper sickness. I was losing myself, and instead of fighting for us, I took the coward's way out. I blamed you for not understanding the pressure I was under, when in reality I was the one who didn't understand what true strength and value were. You were holding the real treasure, and I traded it all away for a pile of fool's gold. He finally ran out of words, the confession leaving him feeling raw and exposed, but also lighter than he had felt in years. He had finally spoken the truth, the ugly, painful, and necessary truth. Evelyn was silent for a long moment, the tears now tracing silent paths down her cheeks. "I loved that man in the park, Jonathan," she said, her voice soft but clear. "The one who was still dreaming, the one who hadn't yet decided that my dreams were less important than his. I held on for him for a long time. I kept hoping he would come back, but he never did." "I know," he whispered. I'm so sorry I let him die." She reached out and for a fleeting moment laid her hand on his arm. Her touch was not one of romantic affection, but of a sad, compassionate closure. It was a gesture of forgiveness. "That man isn't dead, Jonathan," she said. "He's just lost. I hope for your sake you find him again. Goodbye." She turned and walked back to Alistair, who wrapped his arm around her protectively. He gave Jonathan one last, long look, a look that was no longer hostile, but held a sliver of something akin to understanding, perhaps even pity. Then they turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving Jonathan alone with his reckoning. He had come to the gala to cement his victory, to claim his prize. He was leaving with something far more valuable, a brutal, unflinching understanding of himself. He had lost the promotion, the girlfriend, and any lingering hope of reconciliation with the love of his life. He had, by all conventional measures, lost everything. But as he stood there, amidst the ruins of his carefully constructed life, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't happiness or even hope. It was a possibility, the possibility of starting over, the possibility of finding that man who was lost. The reckoning was over. The long road to redemption was just beginning. The days that followed the gala were a blur of quiet deconstruction. Jonathan walked into Robert Morrison's office the next morning and resigned, the letter of resignation already typed and signed. Robert was surprised, but not shocked. In the cutthroat world of Sterling Industries, a public failure of that magnitude was a career death sentence anyway. Jonathan's resignation was just a preemptive strike. "Any plans?" Robert asked, his professional curiosity piqued. "I'm going to find something I lost," Jonathan replied, the cryptic answer feeling more honest than any talk of new jobs or business ventures. He then went home to the sterile penthouse and methodically packed Chloe's belongings into expensive suitcases. She had already gone, leaving behind only a faint, cloying scent of her perfume and a few angry text messages. He left the suitcases with the doorman and felt a profound sense of relief as the door to the apartment clicked shut, sealing off that chapter of his life. Living in the penthouse felt like living in a mausoleum, a monument to a life he no longer wanted. He broke the lease, taking a significant financial hit, and rented a small, simple apartment in a part of the city he and Evelyn used to love, a neighborhood with old brick buildings, independent bookstores, and art galleries. The apartment was sparse, with white walls and wooden floors that echoed with every footstep. For the first time in years there was silence, no corporate jargon, no vapid chatter, no hum of ambition. It was a terrifying, beautiful, and empty canvas. He didn't know what to do with himself. He had spent his entire adult life climbing a ladder, and now he was standing on the ground, with no idea which direction to walk. For weeks he did nothing but walk the city streets, observing. He watched street musicians play for spare change. He saw artists sketching in the park. He saw couples laughing in cafes. He was seeing the world through new eyes, noticing the small, beautiful details he had been blind to for so long. He was seeing the world the way Evelyn used to see it. One afternoon, his wanderings took him past a small, unassuming art supply store. On a whim, he went inside. The air smelled of turpentine, linseed oil, and possibility. It was the smell of his old apartment, the smell of Evelyn. He walked the aisles, his fingers tracing the rough textures of canvas, the smooth wood of paintbrushes. He had no idea what he was doing, but he bought a small starter set, a few canvases, some acrylic paints, and a set of brushes. Back in his empty apartment, he set up the easel in the middle of the living room, the afternoon sun streaming through the large window. He stared at the blank white canvas for what felt like hours. It was the most intimidating thing he had ever faced. More intimidating than any boardroom, any hostile negotiation, any CEO. It was a perfect, unblemished void, and he was terrified of scarring it with his own inadequacy. He thought of Evelyn's words. That man isn't dead, he's just lost. Who was that man? What did he care about? What did he want to say? Jonathan didn't have the answers, so he decided to paint what he felt. He squeezed a dollop of dark, stormy grey paint onto the palette. Then he added a deep, mournful blue. He mixed them together, the colour of regret. His first brushstroke was hesitant, clumsy. He had no technique, no training. He just moved the brush across the canvas, letting the emotions flow out of him and into the colour. He painted the suffocating darkness of his ambition, the sharp, jagged lines of his broken relationships, the hollow emptiness of his success. He painted for hours, losing all track of time. He was covered in paint, his hands, his face, his clothes. The sun went down, and the room grew dark, but he kept painting, fueled by a frantic, desperate energy. When he finally stepped back, exhausted and spent, he looked at what he had created. It was a mess, a chaotic, ugly, abstract explosion of dark colors. It was a portrait of his own broken soul, and it was the most honest thing he had done in a decade. In the center of the dark, chaotic mess, he saw a small patch of canvas he had missed, a tiny, untouched speck of white. It was a flaw in his painting of despair, but as he looked at it, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like a possibility, a glimmer of light in the darkness. He picked up a new brush, and with a trembling hand, he dipped it into the brightest, most vibrant yellow he had. He touched the brush to that tiny speck of white, leaving a single, brilliant dot of color in the heart of the storm. It wasn't a masterpiece. It wasn't even a good painting. But it was a start. It was the first brushstroke on the new canvas of his life. He didn't know what the final picture would look like. He didn't know if he would ever find happiness or redemption. But as he stood there, in his quiet, empty apartment, looking at that single dot of yellow, he felt a flicker of something he had thought was lost forever. A small, tentative spark of hope. He was finally painting his own world, and for the first time he was seeing it in full color. So, what do you think? If you were in Jonathan's shoes, watching the love of your life kiss another man after you threw it all away, what would you have done? Would you have fought for her, walked away in silence, or done something else entirely? Let us know in the comments below.
Thanks for watching.